literacy research. Oh, I just got a recording start. Anyway, I was the director of the New England Learner Persistence Project, and that's what I'm going to be talking with you about tonight. I'm going to do a brief review of some of the academic research that led up to our project, and then shift over to talking about what we learned and the strategies we used. And since you would not want to be listening to me straight for the next 75 minutes, Yari and I have tried to build in ways for this to be interactive, and it includes that quiz that we asked you to do before you joined the webinar. And there will also be opportunities throughout for me to pause and give you a chance to ask questions and contribute strategies that you're using in your own programs. Before we get started, I just wanted to find out one thing about you, and that was if you raise your hand if your role in your program is an administrative coordinator kind of role. So I can see how many folks here do play that role. Okay, I'm seeing six hands raised. Okay, and I realize people play multiple roles. Okay, you can put those hands down. And how many people are primarily playing an instructor role, either a paid instructor or a volunteer tutor? All right, that's 11 of 22, and there are many folks who did not raise hands, and so I'm not quite sure what other roles you play. If you'd like to add that to the chat in the little section below your names, that would help me get a sense of the kinds of work that you do, and so that I can make connections during our time together. One thing I want to say about persistence before we go over to the quiz is that it's a huge topic. I mean, pretty much anything you do to improve your program is going to address persistence. And in fact, many of the strategies we're going to talk about tonight are not going to sound new. You know, anyone who's been paying attention to program improvement has been thinking about similar strategies for a long time. But for some reason, the idea of approaching it through the lens of persistence has been helpful for people. And you know, if that's the way people get to good practice, I'm okay with that. I see two hands that are still raised, and it's flashing on my screen. So if Megan and Carla would put their hands down, that would be great. Okay. So the first thing, okay, Teresa, I'm a former programmer. Okay, thank you, Teresa. The first thing I'm going to ask you to do is refer to the quizzes that hopefully you answered before you got here, because we don't have a lot of time for you to look over each question freshly right now. We were hoping that you would take the quiz and just post your answers now, and then after I walk through the academic research, we'll go back and see how you did on the quiz. So Yari has put the quiz up. If you could just transfer your answers from the piece of paper you were sent up onto the quiz manager, we will give you a minute to do that. So Yari, I'm not sure if I'm supposed to be seeing a lot of answers. I'm only seeing one person having responded. I'm not sure whether I'm supposed to see them at this point. Oh, I understand. So Sandy just mentioned she hadn't seen the quiz. I don't know, perhaps other people haven't seen the quiz yet. Okay, we'll make do. Okay, well, we don't want to take up too much time with this, particularly if people are having a problem, either haven't seen the quiz or aren't sure how to put it into the quiz manager. We can move on, and then I'll get back to this at the end. Oh, now we see more answers coming in. Okay, Barbara asks, I see the question answered. What do I do next? You move the arrow at the top right corner so that you move to the next question, so that you can answer the next question. Okay. Yari has decided our time is up, which is okay, because we'll be returning to that. So in the meantime, I'm going to kind of do what I hope is a brief walkthrough of the academic research, because if you have been on Greg Smith's webinar, he also reviewed this. And it's just really just background information for you. So I'll start by saying that I'm walking through this academic research that's been done on adult learner persistence over the past 15 years because it's been so important in identifying the key factors in persistence and also providing us with a language with which to talk about these issues. So for example, even the word persistence is a contribution from this research, because 15 years ago, the issue was talked about in terms of retention. And if you think about it, retention is a word that reflects the perspective of a program. Programs retain students. They keep the students and they count what their attendance is, and they're keeping them in their program. Persistence is a word that reflects the perspective of the student. The student's the one that's persisting. So right there, that reflects a very a subtle but important shift in the way we've been talking about this issue. We've shifted over to the perspective of the student. So the first research I'm going to talk to you about is the Nixall Learner Persistence Study, which was first published in 1999. And in this study, they interviewed 150 pre-GED students 4 months apart. They were trying to better understand the characteristics of the students who would persist and the supports and barriers that affect their persistence. So at the end of 4 months, 67% of the students remained. And I'm going to show you the next slide, which is a list of the characteristics that the researchers were documenting about the students to find out which of these factors was going to best describe those who persisted. So just take a minute to look through this list. That includes, for example, their gender. Immigrant status does not mean documented or undocumented. It means they were an immigrant as opposed to an American-born student. Age of children, so you can see these factors. And they were just wondering which of these are going to best describe the people who persisted. So, what they found, if you can see those little check marks, that the boxes that are checked are the factors, the characteristics that most strongly characterized the persisters. So interestingly enough, even though it was pre-GED class, it wasn't ESL class, being an immigrant was one of the factors that characterized the persisters. The immigrants tended to persist more than the American-born. Age of children. Students who had teen or adult children, as opposed to little ones, were more likely to persist, and we all understand why that might be. Students who had a goal, who had a clear goal for why they were there, were more likely to persist. And those who were involved previously in some form of education or training. So this was not the first time they had been in an adult education program of any sort. That's pretty interesting. That was pretty interesting finding, because we hadn't thought about that before, being a factor in persistence. And the final thing they found was that the persistent students tended to be a little bit older, over age 30. So the next thing that they started looking for was they interviewed students who had persisted, the ones who were still sticking around 4 months later. And they were asking them, what are the supports and barriers that affected your persistence? What were the things that supported you, and what were the things that got in the way of your being able to persist? And they didn't give them a list, they just interviewed them and did activities with them to kind of draw out these ideas from them. And what they heard was that these were a lot of the factors that they named, things that either affected them in a positive or negative way. So their teacher and their peers affected them, the instruction, the students didn't say relevance of instruction, this is the researcher language. Having a goal, relationships outside of the program, their family, their friends, and this could be either in a positive or negative way. So if you look at this list and you think about which of these factors do you think were the factors that affected them negatively. And I don't think, we probably don't have time to have you type in as a chat, but I just want you to think about that because I'm going to show it to you. Of this list, which did they name? I'll show you. Okay. And these percentages in the orange are the percent of the students who named that factor. So 17% of the students said that unsupportive relationships were getting in the way of their being able to persist. 11% said something about how they feel about themselves. They certainly didn't say my sense of self, but they probably said, oh, I'm not that smart, I didn't think I would make it, but somehow I did. And then life demands, that's a big high one, 49%. Now when they asked them, they also asked them about the supports. And this is what they said about the supports. Okay. One thing you might notice right away is that there are more factors that were identified, and there were only 3 factors that we collected. We had numbers for on the negative. There are 5 here on the positive. Teacher and peers, very important. They've a big support to persisting. It's good instruction, having a goal, relationships. And we saw relationships on the other slide too, but here relationships appears again. But in this case, it's positive relationships. People help me get through. And then sense of self appears again as well. But in this case, it's people who said, probably were telling themselves, I know I can do this. I know I can make it through. So I'm just going to toggle back and forth for a second because I want you to see what you notice about these numbers. I want to go back. Oop, I went too far back. This is the negative, this is the barriers, and the supports. Okay, well what I hope you notice is that these numbers are quite a bit higher than the numbers naming the barriers. So in other words, 51% of people were saying teacher and peers. A lot of people were naming these factors. And what the researchers concluded from this was that they said, people who are persisting are really benefiting from the supports in their lives. And programs tend to pay more attention to the barriers and try to figure out how we're going to address the barriers in people's lives. And maybe if we started paying a bit more attention to the supports and cultivating those supports, that would yield a big payoff. So for example, if people are saying that their family and friend relationships in their lives are really a big factor in helping them persist, 63% in this example, then maybe one of the things the program can do is create opportunities for the family to come to activities at the program and really nurture that relationship between the family and the program to make sure that that supportive relationship continues. Okay, I'm going to move on to the next slide. Hang on. Oh, where are we here? Just have to catch up to myself. Okay. Yeah, thank you. So the findings from this report, from this research, got reported out as 4 recommendations to the field. And so this first recommendation was that what we could be doing is helping students develop an understanding of the negative, positive forces that affect their persistence, and help them make plans to manage the negative forces and build upon the positive ones. That's one recommendation. Another one is, because goals seem to be an important factor in those who persisted, make sure we help students set goals and that those goals get used as a context for instruction and reviewed over time with those students. In addition, there's no point in setting goals unless you make progress on them. So the third recommendation was that we make sure that we help students see progress on their goals. And finally, build self-efficacy. This relates to that sense of self factor. Self-efficacy is your sense that you can reach a goal. It's very similar to your sense of self and self-confidence, but it's a little more specific. Self-confidence refers to a general feeling that you are a confident, competent person. I'm confident, and I'm a competent person in the world. Self-efficacy is more specific. You might say, I'm not a very good cook. You know, I'll never be a good cook. And that's my self-efficacy around reaching that particular goal is bad. Or I might say, I'm a really good language learner. And I might have self-efficacy around language and language learning. So they're saying, help your students build self-efficacy around the goals that they have. Okay, so now we're going to come to research by Alan Quigley. And he's talked about the importance of the first 3 weeks of program participation. What he found, he reviewed several studies, and he found that we have basically a critical window of time, what he's identified as 3 weeks, during which students are really kind of checking out the program, checking out whether this is a place that they'll feel safe, comfortable, that their needs are going to be met. And if we can make them feel welcome and that the sense that they belong there in the first 3 weeks, it's more likely that we'll be able to hold them through the course of a whole program cycle. And his research suggests that this is not a motivation issue. A lot of educators sometimes kind of assume, oh, the students aren't motivated. That's why they're why they're not showing up. He's saying that students come to programs plenty motivated, and something happens in the first 3 weeks that gives them the message that they don't belong there in some way. It's not a good fit for them. They're not going to feel comfortable, and so they leave. And he's suggesting that one of the things we can do to make sure they feel comfortable and hang in there is make an early verbal connection. It doesn't have to be a teacher. It can be any. It can be a counselor, tutor, that shows the student that we are interested in them, we see them, and we're concerned about them being able to succeed. And so this contribution of this research was this idea of it being really important to make a strong connection up front. Now we get to the research of Tom Sticht, who's somebody you may be familiar with, and his research is on turbulence and focus. This research was conducted at San Diego Community College, where he looked at data from 12 ESL classes, and most in depth from the 4 classes that were open entry, open exit. And he was examining all the attendance patterns. You know, when did people come and go? What were their attendance rates? And what were their persistence rates? And he found that open entry makes it more difficult for effective teaching to happen, and therefore for students to want to hang around. Certainly we understand that it's more likely to make it be difficult for instructors to know who's going to be in the class from day to day and to do lessons that would carry over from lesson to lesson. So they kind of have to do one-shot lessons in order to serve their students. He also found that multi-level classes make it more difficult, and that classes that had a particular focus, like work readiness or family literacy, where the students were there because they were interested in a topic and they had a common interest, were more likely to persist. I have to say that sometimes I look at the research and I think it's things that are so obvious to us that are in the field, but somehow research validates it. But the big contribution I think that Stick made is this idea of turbulence. I think that raises an image for program staff of people coming and going that really helps understand what some of the problem might be. Okay, finally we get to the research of Elisa Belzer, who interviewed 10 students. 5 students were attending classes and 5 students were being tutored. She interviewed them several times over the course of 4 months. And not unlike the Nixall study, after 4 months, only 50% of her students were persisting, only 5 out of the 10. And in her work, what she was asking the students about was why they dropped out and how they felt about it, and whether they intended to come back, and whether they felt that dropping out reflected a failure on their part. And what she found out when she talked to them was that, in fact, students who left did so because something changed in their lives. Maybe a job schedule changed or a parent got ill, and they saw it as a temporary break. They need to go and deal with life, and they intended to come back, and in their minds it was not a failure, it was just life. So she introduced this term, stopping out, rather than dropping out. And she concluded that we in the field need a paradigm shift in our thinking, and we need to start designing programs with the assumption that students are going to come and go. And rather than seeing that as a problem, we need to see that as the norm, that this is adult reality, and we need to start constructing programs with this as a given. Okay, so these are the most influential pieces of research on persistence that we've seen in the past 15 years. There are some other things that have been researched in that time, but we're not going to go into those. I think now this allows us, it would be a good time to go back to our quiz, because the quiz really covered all the stuff I've been talking about here. And if we go back to the quiz, we can see how you did. Okay. All right, what I'm seeing, Yari, is no answers yet. One answer? This doesn't look like the cumulative answers that people arrived at. I'm going to give you a second to sort that out, and then we'll move on. Okay. Oh, while Yari's getting that ready, I just want to know if you guys are hanging in there, and if you're doing okay. I know I'm talking a lot and you haven't had a chance to participate yet. I want you to raise your hand if you're doing okay. I realize some people multitask while they're listening to webinars and have to come back. Oh, Hope's happy. Okay. Yari, I don't see the quiz up. Could you, so I don't see the quiz up at all. If you want to put it up, I can go through it. Okay. So I'm going to go through the quiz, even though, Yari, I cannot see the answers. It doesn't look like anyone's answered, but that's okay. I'm just going to go through the answers anyway. So this first question was, persistence is different from retention in that. Okay, I gave it away right in the beginning. Persistence is from the perspective of the student. It was the answer A. The other answer is persistence is lifelong, while retention is just for a semester. I just made that up. I mean, you could say persistence could be lifelong. Persistence is until you reach your goal, you want to persist. And retention is also as long as the program is tracking you. As far as C, there are ways to measure both retention and persistence. In fact, we look at some of the same data about attendance and completion. Okay, I'm going to ask that folks with their hands raised lower their hands, and I'm going to move on to the next question. Okay, the 1990 study of adult learner persistence by Nick Saul identified 4 key factors that support student persistence. Which of these is not one of the factors? Having a goal, seeing progress on your goals, having the GED as a goal. It's C, having the GED as a goal. That was not a finding of their study. Okay. Lavaine, would you put your hand down if you don't mind? Okay. Question 3, research finds that the first 3 weeks of a student's participation in a program is important because A, if they don't develop a sense of connection and belonging within that time, they are more likely to leave. B, if they don't feel challenged in the first 3 weeks, they're more likely to leave. 3, if they haven't reached a short-term goal within that time, they're more likely to leave. The answer is A. It's about establishing a sense of connection. I'm not sure if students necessarily want to feel so challenged in the first 3 weeks. They want to get comfortable in the first 3 weeks and then feel challenged. And certainly we don't expect them necessarily to reach a goal within the first 3 weeks. Okay, the term classroom turbulence was coined by a researcher who was describing A, multi-level classes where the instruction is geared to one level and the other students lose interest. B, adult classes where a lot of the new students are older youth. Or C, the disruption of open entry enrollment where students can enter or leave at any time. Its answer is C, is what turbulence is. Although I know of many programs who would say that the issue of older youth entering programs is creating turbulence. We're doing a lot of work here where I work on youth and adult ed. Okay, 5. When researchers found that adults often leave programs and then come back when they can, rather than dropping out for good, they named this dropping in, stopping out, persistence. Stopping out is the answer. And I think finally, this last question. Since many adults move in and out of programs several times before they finish their studies, Nick Saul researchers recommend that programs A, develop stop-out plans with students, B, set strict attendance policies, C, set a limit on how many times students can come back to a program. And the answer is A. They recommend that we develop stop-out plans with students, and we're going to talk about that a little bit more later on. Okay, I guess the quiz can go away. Okay, terrific. Now I'm going to talk a little bit about our project and let you know that the findings of our project are clustered in categories, and I'm going to talk through a category, and that's when I'm going to, after each category, I'm going to stop, and I'm going to give you a chance to comment on what you do and ask questions about the category. Okay. First, about our project. Very briefly, this project, as I said, involved 18 New England programs that were experimenting with promising persistence strategies that they wanted to try out in their programs. And they could choose a strategy from various categories. So the categories that they chose to try strategies from included intake and orientation. So some programs said, I want to work on that. Others chose from the category instruction and learning options. Others chose counseling and peer supports. Excuse me, and a final group chose a category called re-engagement. These were folks who wanted to find the students who had left the program and try to reel them back in, find a way to re-engage those students. And I'm going to show you the findings of our project. I'm not going to talk a lot about this slide. It's very, gets into the nitty-gritty of the data. But as you'll see, there are several programs that were working in each strategy category. And what I wanted to just draw your attention to was the improvement that they saw, because what they did was that they took numbers pre and post. So they gathered their numbers before they tried the strategy, then they tried the strategy and looked at their numbers again. And what they were looking at was the attendance rate of the students and the completion rate. And by completion, it was whatever they defined their cycle completion as being. And as an average, these numbers are averages for the category. For intake and orientation, those programs saw a 14% increase in their student attendance rate and an 18% increase in their completion rate. And you can see all these. So there was very clear improvement. As you might notice, the number that went up the most for attendance was in instruction and learning options. And we believe that that's because that's the kind of strategy. Improving your instruction is going to improve attendance immediately. If students are really enjoying what's happening in the classroom, you're going to see the result of that in the next class. They're going to show up for the next class. So it has a very immediate impact. However, when we got to the completion rate change, we saw that the strategies that really most affected the completion rate were the counseling and peer support strategies. And we hypothesized that that perhaps is because the counselors and the peers who are also mentoring, doing some peer mentoring, were the ones that were holding people's hands through rough times so that they could carry on and stay with their studies through the entire cycle. And that it's that ongoing attention to people who are maybe at risk of leaving the program that really affects that completion rate. Okay, so before I start talking about our findings, I want you to look at some pictures. This is where you're going to get to use the chat box. These are all images that cropped up when I went to Google Images and put in the word persistence. And I just want you to look at these images and type into the chat box words that come to mind when you look at these pictures. Sisyphus. Endurance. Determination, growth, never give up, slow progress, grow, slowly but surely, push, strength, slowly, solitary, difficult, hang in there, keep going, perseverance, yeah. Okay, well, this is interesting because when we look at these images, it seems as though the idea of persistence is that it's a long, lonely slog. And yet, what we found in our work is that the students who persisted really thrived from community and having people who really helped them get through. And that it was not a lonely, barren, as Megan just closed our list with, lonely, barren experience. The people who were persisting because there was a community around them. So this is one of the findings. What happened is that when all our programs reported their data. They reported numbers, they reported the quantitative data, and they also reported stories. They wrote to us every 2 weeks. They had to submit a story about what they saw changing in their program as a result of having tried their persistence strategy. And we read and analyzed all of these stories, because what we were trying to find out is, okay, these strategies worked, all these things they were trying, but why did they work? What gave them their power? And what we found was that there were these underlying needs that adults have that were being met by these strategies, and that's why they were working, and that's what we're going to go through. So we believe the strategies work because they support adults' need for, and the first one being a sense of belonging and community. And the reason I wrote a little blurb about each one of these is that I know you're going to have access to the PowerPoint, and in case you don't want to take notes and want to remember what this is, I wrote it out, so I wrote something out about each one. So I'm just going to read it to you. When we feel welcomed, respected, and offered a sense of belonging, we are more apt to return to that setting or task. For that reason, cultivating a sense of belonging and community from the moment a prospective adult learner comes through the doors or calls is an important persistence strategy. Okay, and what are some of the ways that we did that? I think these are the concrete strategies I have a feeling are the things people are really waiting for. Okay, so one thing was to make the very first interaction one that welcomes students and builds community. That means, what does a student see when they walk in the door? And what's interesting is one of the programs in our project, this was the only thing they focused on, because what they noticed was that when students came in, they walked into a big room. All the staff had desks against the wall, so their backs were to the middle of the room. There were no signs about where to go, no names on any desks, and a student would walk in and just kind of stand there and wait for somebody to notice them. And they realized how unwelcoming it was to come there. It was almost like somebody was interrupting them to come and, enroll in the program. And right away what they did is it was very simple. They turned their desks around. They put up signage about what their jobs were and who to go speak with. They had their names posted on their desk. They added a little seating area in the corner of the room so people coming in, if they needed to wait, had a comfortable place to sit. And that made a huge difference. And so one of the things we ask people to do is just think about what are students experiencing when they walk in. And some of the things that people have tried when they think about trying to improve what that initial intake experience might be are things like, first of all, introducing yourself right away, getting the name of the student and remembering and using that student's name right away, wearing name tags, posting signs that welcome and direct the students, decorating their walls with photographs and bios of students, current students and past students who have achieved various things, involving bilingual staff and students in welcoming the new students in, and offering refreshments if possible. Now, I realize that the intake process for programs may be very different. For some programs, it's kind of a rolling admission kind of thing. People walk in, it's a walk-in, and they're an individual and they talk to somebody. And that's one kind of experience you want to pay attention to. In other programs, they're larger programs, and their intake might be on a given night. This is our intake and registration night, and everybody knows what it is. And on that night, we open the door, and 50 people are standing outside, and they all come in at the same time. And a bunch of us sit there and register students. So, people are working in different kinds of contexts. But in all of these contexts, people were thinking about what could they do to make this a more inviting experience. For those who were kind of working with groups who were coming in and meeting them for the first time, while students are being registered, they might have the rest of the students gathered. That's where there might be refreshments. They might do icebreakers to help students get to know one another. Have students start talking to each other about why they're there, what their purposes and goals are. They might talk to the students about what the typical patterns of persistence are for the students who come there, and explain to them right up front the possibility that they might need to stop out for a time and to deal with life circumstances. And the program was interested in making sure they didn't lose touch and that they would want to make a stop out plan with them. Students are also going to feel more comfortable if they see people like them. So having current students at an orientation to welcome the new students. One program did this lovely thing where at the they would have an ABE orientation and an ESL orientation. And at each one, they would have, the staff would leave the room, and they would have current students there who were there to answer questions of the new students. And because the staff wasn't there, they could really ask honestly, you know, what do you really think about this place, or how much homework do they give here, you know, and the current students could talk to them, and the current students could also tell them about the struggles they had in persisting in their learning and what they did to overcome them. So a lot of upfront work got done that was very important. The other two, make an early individual connection to establish a relationship with each student. That's what a lot of the counselors, you know, I know not all programs have counselors, but for those who do, counselors were very upfront about establishing a relationship with students. And then maintaining a sense of community. I mean, it has to be an ongoing thing. Very often this happens in classrooms, and it has to do with the instruction that's going on in classrooms. Group work and helping people get to know each other in their identities beyond just their student identities, but as whole people, is going to be helpful in a classroom. And also cross program activities, whether it's field trips or guest speakers or doing a blood drive. Public recognition of students for having good attendance or persistence or life achievements, somebody getting a driver's license, whatever. But public recognition really makes people feel validated and seen. This is about people really feeling like, I want to be seen as a person. And also one last thing I'm going to mention here is offering people kind of symbols of membership in the community, whether it's a t-shirt or a pen or something that says, you know, you're in our club now. One program gave people, it was an ESL program, gave them refrigerator magnets that the students loved. It had the program name on it, and the reason they gave it to them is that they wanted them to encourage them to call in if they were going to be absent. And so what was on the magnet was a script, the call-in script that said, my name is blank and I will be absent today. So it served multiple purposes to do that. Okay, so we are going to, before I open this up for your comments and questions, we're going to actually show you a little short video clip about how one program improved. Okay, so that is one program's effort to build community. I think, Yari, I'm aware that we're behind schedule, but I do want to open it up because I've been talking a long time and give people a chance to either ask questions at this point or contribute ideas of how they build community. So I'm turning my mic off. Yep. If you could raise your hand if you have a question or a suggestion, a contribution, then I'll just call on you. Not yet. Does that mean I should move on? Well, since we're behind schedule, that's what I'm going to do. Okay. I'm going to move on to the next, we call these drivers of persistence, these categories that we think are so powerful. So the next driver is clarity of purpose. The next two we're going to talk about get more into classroom practice, which may be what some of you are waiting for actually. So clarity of purpose refers to helping students gain clarity about their own purposes for learning, their goals and dreams, and about the program's expectations and approaches to providing education. That way, adults can make informed decisions and take responsibility for their learning. Okay, so the Nixall study and our study found that students really responded to clarifying their own goals and really being clear about what the teacher was trying to do. And those are the two ways I'm going to focus this. The problem, the unfortunate result of Nixall's findings, though, in the field is that because Nixall found that the persistent students tended to have goals, the way that got interpreted in the field is that when students, most programs implemented a protocol where when most students came to the program, they were expected to name a goal. And unfortunately, I'm sorry, okay, Carla, thank you. Unfortunately, it doesn't work like that. If you don't have a goal, walking in and being asked to set one immediately is not going to yield an authentic, real goal. And if you don't have an authentic goal that the student really has ownership of, then it's not going to be a very useful guide for you in providing instruction. So I think it's really important to slow down, and this is what a lot of programs are doing in their orientations, extending their orientations to include a lot more goal-setting activities that help students think about it and really explore what matters to them, where they want to be, what the options are, what their past experience setting and achieving goals has been, supports and barriers, and they also need a social process of hearing what other people are thinking, because very often they don't even know what the possibilities are. And many students, for example, don't consider going to college until they discover that many of their peers are planning to do that, and they go, oh, well, maybe I could do that too. So there's a lot of really good goal-setting activities out there. I'm going to show you some sample questions you could ask that really help students explore this. And it can happen either in an orientation experience or it can happen in the classroom as well. Here are some sample questions that would help clarify goals. What dreams do you have? And not only work. I mean, we're so focused on work in these times, but people have other kinds of dreams as well. What's the difference between a dream and a goal? Why are they both important? How do you think your life will be different after you've met your goals? How will you know you're making progress toward your goal? What will that look like? What will be difficult? What are you learning that's helping you move toward your goals? And what are you doing outside of class to make progress on your goals? At the end, we're going to point you to our website where there are actually more tools that you can download that relate to goal setting. And perhaps you have these already. But what has struck me is how, as I hear programs talk about their goal setting process, it's often early and quick. And we're recommending that it's slower and lasts a longer period of time, and the goals get revisited. So that's one way that clarity of purpose really mattered. The second way has to do with the clarity of instruction. So does the student really understand how what's being taught is related to helping them with their goals? It's amazing. We think that because we understand the connection between what we're teaching, why we're teaching it, and the student's goals, we understand that connection. We assume that they see that connection. They don't, unless we name it. And that might take the form as simply as posting the class objectives at the beginning of the session and talking through not only what are we going to do, but why are we going to do it? And then going back at the end and revisiting those and then thinking about, well, how are we going to use what we learned today outside the classroom? One teacher I know just began doing this. At the end of the class, she would say to her students, why did I do the activities with you that we did today? In the beginning of the cycle, her students could not answer that question, and that was an eye-opener for her. She thought it would be obvious. And so she had to start talking through with them, for them, what she was doing and why she was doing it until they were able to do that, which happened, midway through the cycle. And that enabled them not only to understand the purpose of instruction, how it was going to help them and help them meet their goals, but also start giving her feedback on what was working for them better, and give her some guidance. So here are some things you could say that would help build transparency. For example, we're going to practice underlying unfamiliar words in our story today because seeing how many there are is one way to find out if a text is too easy or difficult for you. Why else might you underline new words? Okay, so right there, you're being explicit about why you're teaching what you're teaching and asking them to think about what are some other reasons that underlining words might be a helpful strategy for them. So bringing them into that conversation of understanding what's being taught and why. Another one, I make notes when someone is giving me directions because I know I have a bad memory and the notes help me. What do you do to remember what you've learned? And finally, we did 3 activities today. Talk to your partner about which you think you learned the most from, and then we'll share. All of these kinds of things are helping students have a better understanding of their learning and the teacher's teaching and the connection between the two, and therefore become more independent learners. And when they're able to do that, they are more invested in their learning and more likely to persist. Okay, so I know that we're I need to move along quickly, so I'm going to move on to the next driver, which is competence. This is a biggie and probably going to be our last one for this evening. Adults' beliefs about their competence can have a profound effect on their persistence and achievement. Such beliefs reflect their self-efficacy, which we talked about before. Students with more self-efficacy are more willing to persist to reach their goals in the face of adversity. People who have high self-efficacy visualize success, whereas those who doubt their efficacy typically visualize failure. Okay, there's been a lot of work on research on the connection between self-efficacy and learning and persistence. It is very important. I mean, negative messages about not being able to do things are so powerful. There's something like somewhere I read, it takes 5 positive messages about someone's competence to counterbalance 1 negative message, because those negative messages are so powerful for us. So here are some things that you can do. One is to make sure that students experience success. And you can do that by scaffolding instruction, making sure that directions to activities are very clear, that the students understand what is expected of them, modeling what you want them to do, doing it together before you ask them to do it independently, breaking activities into smaller steps, and teaching whatever you're teaching in context of real life activities so that the students understand the purpose of why they're learning that. It's very important for students to experience success. Next, help them learn to self-assess their progress, to see and self-assess their progress. Very often, if you ask students if they're making progress, they'll say, I don't know, the teacher will tell me if I make progress. And the way you build independent, confident learners is to help them see when they've made progress. And there are many ways you can do that. You can have discussions with students asking them, well, how are we going to know? We're going to do this activity. How are we going to know if we did it well? Or we have this goal. How are we going to know when we get there? You can also talk with them about their out-of-class accomplishments and their abilities, whether it's playing music or driving or whatever, so that part of what they're bringing into the classroom and what's part of their holding in their being is the parts of themselves where they feel competent, as well as the parts of themselves where they don't feel so competent. You can also involve them in creating assessment tools. Okay, this is what we're trying to do. What questions would you ask if you wanted to know if I was understanding this? Really get them to think about what progress looks like. And then finally, since I'm kind of motoring here, is to actually build study skills. One of the reasons, if you remember back, I said in our project some of the programs tried re-engagement strategies, pulling the students back in who had already left. And what they did was that they tried to give them options. They said, okay, you can come back, and you can come back into the classroom, or we'll give you some self-study options. I'll give you materials you can take home, you work at home, and then once in a while we'll check in, or I'll give you some things to do online, then we'll check in. And what the instructors found is that what stymied that is that the students were struggling with not really knowing how to study on their own. And I don't mean just they didn't know how to find a quiet place or organize their papers. I mean they were accustomed to the instructions for their activities being described to them by their teachers. And so it was very difficult for them to read instructions and know what they were supposed to do. And also, although the teacher said to them, if you're stuck, call me. I'm here as your resource to help you, they would not call. And so the teachers it was a big wake-up call, because they realized, you know, there's all this talk now about self-study, but our students are really struggling with this, and they're not able to do it effectively. So really helping them build study skills is very important. And I have an example of that. Here's a study skills checklist sample. The URL is at the top. It's actually 2 pages long, but you can see that it's a set of study items that you can walk through with students and find out where they are, where they need some help. Okay, I am going to continue. There are other things you can do to build a sense of competence. One is to give students new roles. One of the things that happened in our project was that some students became peer mentors. And then the reason programs were trying peer mentors was that they thought, well, it's going to boost the persistence of the new students because they're going to have a mentor, somebody who's watching out for them. Well, what they found is that the people whose persistence it affected was the mentors themselves, that they felt so proud, affirmed by taking this new role and playing out that role that their persistence really skyrocketed, which was very interesting. So giving students new roles, whether it's being the ones to mentor other students, to be the ones that go at orientation and talk to the incoming students, helping their peers in the classroom, being ones, being involved in advocacy efforts, calling legislators and all that good stuff, speaking at graduation. All of these things are an incredible boost to people's sense of self and their competence and their persistence. Okay, moving on to receiving encouragement. Why did I include this? I included this because one thing we discovered in the literature is that giving encouragement poorly, in other words, overpraising people, can actually backfire and undermine their sense of competence. So there are good ways to praise and there are ineffective ways to praise. Here we go. Effective praise has to be very specific and given selectively for some real accomplishment. and be given sincerely and with enthusiasm, right? Ineffective praise tends to be very general. It's also overused. Everything you do is wonderful. All you have to do, you know, it's so common that the student basically says, you know, I can't believe this anymore. And I think all of us have had that experience of, you know, not necessarily trusting the praise we're being given because it was too fast and loose, right? This is really important because we don't want our praise to backfire. So it really needs to be given quite carefully. There's one other thing I wanted to say about praise. Oh, well, one thing, I forget what I was going to say, but I'm going to show you something which, has to do with not only praising in words, but backing it up with actions. And I wanted to show you this slide. This is a page out of the Change Agent newspaper, which I highly recommend. We publish it. It's a newspaper about social justice and kind of issues that are pertinent to students. So it's thematic, and it may be about healthcare, or it may be about work, or it may be about schools. Maybe it's very topical. And this article comes from an issue that was about taking action to stay in school. And all the articles, many of them are written by students who are sharing their strategies for what did they do to stay in school. And this little piece is an activity where the family, it was a family night, and the family was writing cards to say what they were going to do to support their family member to continue with their learning. And the family members were writing cards about what they thought would help them. So I don't know if you can see the handwritten card on the right. It says, "Wake me up by 4 a.m. and please make the coffee. I love you." This was just a beautiful event where people really talked about the commitment they were making to each other and what they were going to do to actually help each other, help their family members persist. I want to go back to one other thing which was on the prior slide. The last item was reduce stress. Stress affects all of us. It's the body's natural reaction to being fearful or threatened. You don't need to go back, Yari, it's okay. So there's a clear connection between stress and learning that can affect students' ability to manage being in a class. And poverty is going to affect stress level. We have students who may have experienced trauma. There's a lot of undisclosed violence in people's lives. Stress is clearly an issue that affects people being able to manage their studying life. So here are some things you can do. I'm going to show you also a resource we've got. Beginning class with free writing that allows students to clear their minds and focus on the class. Taking breaks in class. Reviewing what has been done so that students are reminded of what they've already accomplished. Making sure that students know what's coming up next and they feel prepared and not kind of taken off guard. Incorporating short relaxation exercises, either simple stretches that help people breathe and relax, and other things that are just making learning fun. So here's an example of a stress relief activity. I think I see that it's not quite big enough for you to read, but it's activities that you can do with students about talking about stress. There are other such activities on our website, and when you get the PowerPoint, you can probably see a bigger version of this. So, given the time, I'm going to jump over the next. There are 6 drivers of persistence altogether. We've talked about 3. The remaining 3, I'll just mention, are stability, relevance, and agency. Stability is about making your program as stable as possible, and that includes managing enrollment, if possible, that whole tamping down that revolving door phenomenon, and also having the stability of having a counselor or someone who checks in with you and just kind of that you're aware, has seen you, and is watching out for you. Those are the main stability strategies. We're not going to read this text now because you're going to get it and you can look at it on your own. Relevance is, I think, probably an obvious one to everyone. you know, relevant instruction. It helps keep people around. I mean, why would you stick around for instruction that isn't relevant? So that's an obvious one. And then the final one is agency. And agency is the human capacity to make things happen through your actions. And we all know that adults want to be treated as adults. They want to make decisions for themselves. They want to have choices. And so a big part of the strategies that worked for us were strategies that gave students choices. Choices about what they were going to learn, choices about how they were going to learn, decision making as much as possible with the teacher in the classroom, using authentic materials that they thought, that mirrored real life. So for example, the students really responded to looking at real-life websites as opposed to instructional websites, because it was like, this is real. I really have to do this. And other people that are not like me, that are out, there's regular old adults who are educated, they look at these websites. So those were really important. All of this you can read more about in our project report, which is online. I'm going to now show you at the end our website, and I think Yari's going to bring it live so I can click around for you to show you a couple of things. Okay, so this is our persistence website. I'm just going to orient you to how to navigate it so that you can use it at your leisure. One thing you can get to is a self-assessment. And this is a self-assessment of a whole bunch of many of these strategies that I've been talking about. And you can either get a version of the self-assessment that is organized by these factors here: intake and orientation, instruction, counseling, student involvement, blah, 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 blah. Or you can get a version of it that is organized by the drivers of persistence that I've been talking about tonight. But I'm going to just show you the format to show you what it looks like. Okay, so this is intake and orientation. Here's the list of strategies. You can self-assess how well your program does on that strategy and make comments to help prioritize which ones feel important to you. Okay, if I close this, am I going to close out? No. Okay. All right. So, but the meat of the website is that there are lots and lots of resources related to lots of strategies. So, for example, let's say you wanted to look in the instructional strategies. This is the instruction section. At the bottom of the introductory paragraph, you'll see read more about specific strategies. This is at the bottom of every single one of these categories. So I click on strategies. Here is a list of evidence-based strategies. So let's say, for example, I'm interested in strategy F, involve students in decision-making about their learning. I could click on examples, research, and tools, and I will get a whole list of resources. Here are examples of writings about what strategy are we in? Okay, students involved in decision making. These are examples that you can read about teachers doing that. And then we have some research, and then we have tools. Okay, so for example, let's open one. I don't mean to make you all queasy by going up and down here. Where's the one I want to looking for? Creating a learning community. Hang on. Oh, I don't see it. I'm in the wrong place. Anyway, I'm going to go somewhere else. Let's say you're interested in student involvement. Okay, again, you're in that category. You go to the bottom, you click on the strategies. Okay, here are the strategies. Let's say you're interested in provide meaningful opportunities for student involvement and leadership. Okay, what do you got here? Oh, what happened? Okay, there are 3 strategies under this. What just happened? Did something go back by itself? I don't know why we're backing up by itself. Anyway, I'm gonna leave here. But you can open. What I'm trying to do is just open a particular. You can open a resource and get the document. In this case, this is a wonderful piece that's opening called A Night to Dream. And this is an example of a program that brought together community mentors to talk with the students about their dreams and how they reached their dreams, from opening a daycare to buying a house, real life things that people were able to do. And they came and they talked to the students about how they did it, and then they talked to the students about how they could do it, and it was a lovely event. So you could go and just, you know, browse around and find things as well. You know, so there are examples that are write-ups, and then there are actual tools. So I'm not going to open a bunch, but there are things like handouts and quizzes and things that you could actually use for these different strategies. Let me go back to the home. I want to show you one other thing, which is a change agent, which I mentioned. And I'm showing you this because here is the issue that we were looking at, taking action to stay in school. But there are many back issues on topics that may be of interest to you. The most recent issue was about peaceful tomorrows. It marked the 10-year anniversary of 9/11, and it's about building a peaceful tomorrow. And the former issue was about toxics in the world. An issue about fashion. Boy, was that popular. So this is something you can check out. You can access it for free on the website if you register. Okay. Let's see. Was there anything else I needed to say? I think I need to toss this back to you, Yari, since we're closing in on the end of our time. I want to thank you all for letting me talk with you, and I'm sorry we didn't get further along, and I'm sorry I didn't let you get a word in edgewise. So I'm turning my mic off.
Well, thank you, Andy, and thanks everyone for your patience through tonight's technical difficulties there. Thank you, everyone, and I just want to give you a reminder that we're going to be sending out an evaluation link. If everyone could complete it and give us back your feedback or any ideas on future trainings, that would be wonderful. A couple weeks later, we are going to do a transfer of learning to see if any of the information that was presented today on the 6 drivers, if you're implementing them. So it would be great if you could give us some of that feedback. It is one of our state requirements, since it is funded by the Florida Department of Education. I will be emailing the PowerPoint presentation along with the evaluation link. Please double check your junk mail just in case our emails are going in there. That tends to happen every once in a while. Now, Andy is going to be writing a miniature blog kind of giving a quick overview for individuals that might have missed it, but it would be great to get some individuals' feedback that attended the workshop. And we are recording the audio so you can listen to it in the future or share with other colleagues. So with that, thank you very much, and you guys have a wonderful evening.